Welcome to this video in our course Competition Policy and Strategy. In this video we are going to cover exercise 9.2 which is part of the assignment number 9 on the topic of competition restraints. And in this exercise we are going to talk about restraints in the sense of exclusive supplies and transfer payments. Alright, and we are going to think about these issues of exclusive supplies and transfer payments in the following model. We are going to assume that a good is consumed by only one consumer. We will see later on that this is just a simplifying assumption which will have not much effect on our model overall. But let's just, for example, for the moment accept that there's only one single consumer. We know the demand function of this single consumer. It reads P equals 100 minus Q. And then we know that there is a firm in the market, so an incumbent, who is a monopolist in the market right now. And this incumbent produces the good at some marginal costs, CI equal to 20. There is no fixed costs in production. All right. Now, first, as we usually do, let's consider this baseline situation as a benchmark. So let's have a look at the result and in the model as is. Derive the price, quantity, consumer surplus, monopolist, profit that result in equilibrium. This very simple model where there is one single monopolist. I'm sure I don't need to explain it into too much detail. So we have a monopolist maximizing their profits for a given demand function, given costs, etc. So we know the equilibrium in this benchmark situation will be a quantity of 40, a price of 60, profits of the monopolist of 1,600 and consumer surplus of 800. This, as I said, is just a point of comparison for future tasks. So let's continue with these future tasks. Let's dive right into task B. In task B, we are now going to consider that there is another firm, a second firm, an entrant, who decides whether entry is profitable. The entrant produces at marginal costs CE equal 10, so notably it's lower than the cost of the incumbent. We assume that there is no costs of entry, so no fixed cost or sunk cost of any kind. In the case of market entry by the entrant, there will be Bertrand competition, so competing in prices. We are now going to answer, will the entrant enter the market? We are asked to determine the price and the consumer surplus in equilibrium. What are the profits of two firms? All right, so how do we answer the question whether or not the entrant will enter the market? Well, in this game, there is only two strategies, that is enter, not enter. Not entering means that the entrant makes zero profits, right? No profits at all. So let's compare not entering and making zero profits with hypothetically entering the market. All right, so equilibrium under market entry. If the entrant enters the market, we said that there will be Bertrand competition. In Bertrand competition, it is the best answer to set a price that is marginally lower than that of the other firm. Now, and this continues until marginal costs are reached. So the entrant with their lower marginal costs can undercut the incumbent ever so slightly and set a price P equal to 20 minus some epsilon. And with that, setting this price, the entrant will then supply the whole market and sell a quantity of 80. In this case, the entrant will make profits of 800, right? Because we have a price of 20 minus costs of 10, so 10 times a quantity of 80, so profits of 800. The incumbent, however, because they sell nothing, Bertrand competition and undercut, will make zero profits. So in this case, we can immediately tell that market entry is profitable for the entrant E, because a profit of 800 is more than a profit of 0. All right. At the same time, what we observe is we have gains in welfare. As a reminder, previously we had profits in the amount of 1600 and consumer surplus in the amount of 800. Now we have profits in the amount of 800 and consumer surplus in the amount of 3200. Where does this increased consumer surplus, where does this increase in welfare come from? Well, first of all, we have more efficient production by the entrant because they have reduced constant marginal costs in comparison to the incumbent. And second reason is the contestability of the market, which implies that there is room for competition if one firm enters, in this case, barter competition. All right, so in this case, the entrant will enter the market, welfare will increase. Now under task C, we are going to consider a situation where the monopolist wants to prevent the entrant from entering the market. It kind of makes sense given the results we saw before. The incumbent, the monopolist that is already in the market, wants to prevent the entrant from entering the market by forming a long-term supply contract with the consumer. And that is the only reason why we are talking about a single consumer, because otherwise this would not be plausible at all, right? But that's just an aside. The idea of the entrant, the idea of the incumbent is, let's form a long-term supply contract with the single consumer I have so that they can only buy from me. So if this contract is concluded, the consumer agrees to purchase the good only from the incumbent, and because the consumer as of now has no incentive to agree to this contract, the incumbent will need to compensate the consumer for this restriction. So the idea is the incumbent pays the consumer some transfer fee. Now the question is, how much would the incumbent have to pay to the consumer in order to make them agree to this contract? And is this contract even feasible? So will this contract be formed? Can the incumbent, through this contract, prevent entry? Right. So the idea is for the consumer to agree to this contract, their payoff needs to be at least equal to the situation where they don't agree to the contract. And if they don't agree to any kind of contract, we saw the result under task B, right? If the consumer does not agree to the contract, then we already know entrant will enter the market, price will decrease, consumer will make a consumer surplus of 3,200. So we already know that in order for the consumer to agree to this contract, the transfer payment must match at least match this foregone additional consumer surplus, right? So moving from the situation under A, where the consumer had 800 consumer surplus, the consumer's willingness to pay for an additional for this entrant to enter the market is the gain in consumer surplus they will achieve under this condition. So going from 800 to 3,200, and this difference is exactly the valuation of the consumer surplus for this possibility of the entrant to enter the market, right? So the incumbent would have to compensate the consumer in exactly this amount. So this transfer payment needs to be larger or equal to 2,400. All right. If this does not hold, then of course the consumer will not agree to the contract. However, we know that in this situation where the incumbent is the sole firm in the market and is earning monopolist profits, their profit are only 1,600. That's what we calculated under task A as well. So what we see is, well, actually the monopolist's profits, the incumbent's profits, as long as they are a monopolist, is smaller than the transfer payment needed to prevent or to incentivize the consumer to agree to the contract. So it is not possible for the incumbent to compensate the consumer and make them agree to this long-term supply contract. All right, so in this case, the incumbent cannot convince the consumer, and thus the market entry cannot be prevented.